Thanks everyone for joining us during our continuing segment on the destruction caused by superhero activity and the question of responsibility for destroyed infrastructure. Joining us live via satellite from their respective studios, we have Josephine Shirley, COO of Destructator, the app for tracking superhero-related destruction in real time, Anne Hannigan, Director of Communications for the Safety First Foundation, and Brock Funderburg, researcher at the independent policy group Center for Heroism Studies. Let's get right into it. And before the break, we were discussing whether there is any price too high for the protection of the human race.
That's right, Tom. And I think, in these superhero-related activities, there's going to be some damage. And we just have to be as prepared as we can to face the costs. It's just a fact of life. And there's even regulations.
And so what are you saying? That when the Hulk smashes your Benz or collapses your entire apartment building, that's fine and the federal government should just have to foot the bill? Congress didn't wreck your car or your sofa. Heck, you chose to live there and you should have to take the responsibility for that.
There are many forces beyond choice and even law and regulation at work here, including the Avengers. But we can plan for and solve this problem ourselves through clear communication, international funds, workflows, and agreements. It's not so much an economic problem as it is one about attitude.
So maybe we should all have our own part to do? I'd certainly rather have my own small set of clear responsibilities than sending a collections agent to Thanos. Thanks again to our panel for joining us. We'll see you next time. So I don't know generally how common this is, but it's happened to me more than once. I'm watching a superhero movie with friends, and after a particularly destructive moment, someone asks jokingly, "Dang, who is gonna deal with this mess?" We've just seen New York get completely demolished by a super-powered battle between good and evil, and in addition to the and which mark fictional metropolitan destruction, people sometimes wonder, jokingly, sure, about the practical operations of fictional worlds in such situations. The paradox of fiction means we have real reactions to things we know are not real. In the case of reactions to wanton destruction, we often suspend our disbelief beyond superheroes and supervillains to accept that a fictional Los Angeles, for instance, is one possible Los Angeles, with residents and a government that gets demolished. So we wonder about that possible Los Angeles. Man, who is gonna clean all this up? Who is gonna pay for it all? And of course, it's not just superhero films. The disaster film is a genre that we have had for about as long as we have had films. The name kinda says it all. They show some disaster unfold, a la San Andreas, Towering Inferno, 2012. Even Titanic, Independence Day, and Godzilla are arguably disaster films. So we see some disaster happen, everything gets destroyed, and then the credits roll. We aren't privy to the rebuilding because it's boring, and it seems so after the fact. It's rarely discussed in fiction, so we can only speculate about the cost and logistics of fabricated rubble removal. Is there insurance? A regional, national, or global superhero destruction cleanup fund paid for by taxes? Has ruin removal been privatized? And so we ask, what happens now? But there's no answer. So a more productive question may be, does this somehow help us understand how we confront destruction in our own world? One thing superhero and disaster movies may do is give us an avenue to confront the literal cost of destruction and the process of recovering from it in a way that doesn't feel like we're avoiding real emotional turmoil. Comments like, "Oh man, who is gonna clean all this up?" come from a place of knowing that there's no real harm, but appreciating that destruction has happened.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
In offhand jokes about responsibility for damage incurred during the Avengers or Deep Impact, we're shown that this is something we reflexively react to. A reflexive reaction which wouldn't be nearly so important to pick apart in this video if we knew how to have it earnestly when real disaster actually strikes. To which now you may say, do we not? And to which I will respond with this kind of like wishy-washy hand motion. The nature of disaster makes it hard to plan for, but we can be sure that bad things will happen and that response will be needed. And there are large variances in the degree and quality of that response, often concerning the very things that we joke about at the end of disaster movies. Who's gonna clean all this up? Who's gonna pay for it all? Lack of clear answers to these questions precisely affected the rescue of Titanic passengers and the payment of insurance claims, the ongoing process of containing the Chernobyl reactor, the handling of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and Hurricane Sandy recovery. One of the most egregious examples of a failure to seriously consider responsibility in the wake of disaster was Hurricane Katrina in 2005. In the first line of its Wikipedia entry, Katrina is described as the costliest natural disaster in US history and one of the 5 most deadly. Upwards of 1,836 people died and an estimated $108 billion worth of damage was done. Katrina caused 44 oil spills, leveled over 200,000 homes, and displaced almost 1 million people. The local and federal government's response during and after Katrina has been widely and roundly criticized for the last 10 years, and with good reason. One of the more galling debacles was that while Congress approved a $62 billion aid package for Katrina victims, rebuilding infrastructure was delayed as politicians argued about how much emergency disaster loan debt forgiveness was appropriate for rebuilding cities like New Orleans, and whether budget cuts should have to be found elsewhere first. In response to the situation, Louisiana Rep. Cedric Richmond wrote, "As natural disasters become more frequent, it is essential that we work together to ensure that our communities are better prepared and that resources that support a robust recovery are available." End quote. 200,000 homes leveled, 1 million people displaced, and bureaucracy halts relief because politics prevents an answer to the question, who's gonna pay for all this? So, am I saying that if people in positions of authority had gone to see, I don't know, Age of Ultron or Cloverfield and paid attention when their pal made a joke about how expensive it would be to rebuild a city, everything would have turned out differently in Louisiana or Michigan? No, I'm not. I am saying that cinema's ruin-causing bad actors often either are icebergs and hurricanes or are just as easy to hold accountable as icebergs and hurricanes. Whatever reaction we have to fictional disaster, it may be instructive to ask if we have similar reactions to fact. And if we don't, why might that be? Like, rewatch the front of this episode and imagine that instead of superheroes, we're talking about a tsunami. Does the conversation become tone-deaf or insulting? Why or why not? This last weekend, against my better judgment and heeding not the warnings of others, I went to go see Batman vs. Superman, which, I mean, it was fine. It was also kind of a disaster depicting disaster. But it occasionally bumped into really neat ideas, like Batman's use of architecture to trap Superman that keeps him literally grounded in the world he's from, unlike floaty McBlue alien pants. Batman's assertion that Superman is not brave. Men are brave. CF our One Punch Man episode. And Batman's clear calculation of costs as long as Superman is around. Human cost, moral, ethical, and staring at the rubble of his ruined corporate headquarters, one can only imagine economic costs. Often this destruction seems part of the superhero contract. There's a sense of the maximum acceptable loss for repeatedly saving the world. It may be a Benz or two, some buildings on Madison Avenue, or the lives of innocent people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Batman vs. Superman, by the way, has a couple weird bits of voiceover where someone on a radio goes, "Thank God that building was abandoned," or "Since it's after 5 p.m., downtown is empty." How convenient. Anyway, when that degree of maximum acceptable loss is met or exceeded, how do fictional worlds deal with it? In movies like The Incredibles, superheroes are outlawed. In Men in Black, minds are erased and memories suggested. But in the Marvel universe, or after a Godzilla attack, or in our own world, how do we end up paying for disaster when it happens? Often there's no ready answer to that question because, except in jest about the Hulk, no one has asked it. What do y'all think? Do superhero and disaster movies give us an opportunity to confront or consider the cost of disaster in ways that we don't normally? Let us know in the comments and I will respond to some of them in next week's comment response video. This week's comment response video will be coming out on Friday. It's gonna be a couple days late. Special thanks to Joe from It's Okay to Be Smart, Vanessa from Braincraft, and Anna from Gross Science, who were our talking heads at the front of this episode. And in case you missed it, PBS Digital Studios is doing an audience survey so that we can learn more about you. So if you want to answer some questions and tell us about yourselves, we would love to know more about you. There's a link to that in the description too. This week's episode would not have been possible or good without the hard work of these research assistants at the Center for Heroism Studies. We have a Facebook, an IRC, and a subreddit. Links in the doobly-doo. See you soon.